As it is probably obvious, we have a brand new baby coming very, very soon. Now, I've done big freezer meal prep days in the past, and I've exhausted myself trying to just cook beyond what our family eats in a regular day. I was determined to not do that this time and spread this out over several days. So lots of the meals I'm going to be making today and freezing, or components of meals, so more on that in a bit. I just made what I was going to be making for my family for dinner and then made extra. Not that that's not more effort than just making the normal amount, because it is. But I was trying to get away from having this huge, exhausting day where I make all of the food that we're going to need for the few weeks or however long I can get ahead, that we are trying to just rest and recover from having a brand new baby. Another mistake that I've made with doing bulk freezer prep in the past is making things that have to thaw out completely before you can actually use them, which is still useful because when you think of something the night before, put it in the fridge, the next day you have a meal that you didn't have to make the kitchen dirty for, dishes dirty for. But when you're trying to recover postpartum, I'm trying to take as much of the thought work out of this for all of the hands that are involved. So with our large family, there are every age represented in this family, and they're all very helpful. My husband is very helpful, but still trying to make it to where nobody has to think ahead of time in order for there to be a meal on the table is what I was trying to accomplish here. And then another thing that I wanted to do was make sure that we don't have anything that has to store in a weird way, so that you have to take a lot of considerations in prep for how it's frozen and in what kind of container it's frozen. I was trying to keep it really simple by doing things that can just be stored in a good old-fashioned Ziploc, as old-fashioned as those are, a freezer Ziploc, because with something like making a bunch of soup, you can cut the Ziploc off, plop it down fully frozen into a big soup pot, put the lid on, and let it simmer until it's back to warm again. And then, you don't have to think about that. I wanted to make sure to have plenty of bread items on hand because we really do well with having a lot of bread, and I'm probably not going to make bread at least for a week or two. I say 2, but I know a lot of times leading up to it, I think, okay, I'm going to relax for 2 straight weeks. I'm not even going to get out of this bed. And then I get pretty antsy and want to do a few light things in week 2. So, it's not like I'm making weeks and weeks worth of bread, but we do like to have things like bagels and English muffins and bread on a regular basis. So I wanted to make sure we could have some of that frozen as well. I've frozen bread at various stages of the process. So I've frozen it after it's done its bulk ferment and been shaped in the dough phase. I have frozen it after it is baked. I, a lot of times, have frozen it after baking, then cooling, then slicing. And that is actually the most useful thing, in my opinion, just for us as a family to use something, to take something like bagels that you can go through the entire process, have them completely baked, cut down the middle, thrown in a bag. Someone can take it out of the bag, pop it open, put it in the toaster, and on a very quick whim, have themselves something for a sandwich or something to put some cream cheese on for breakfast with an egg. I'm going to be trying that today with English muffins as well, because we like to have them for breakfast sandwiches. Now, the first thing I'm doing today is making a whole bunch of chicken. So I put on 4 whole chickens. That way we can eat some for lunch as well. But then I can process all of that chicken. And what I mean by that is taking it all off the bone, making the bones into bone broth all at one time, and use it for soup. I was trying to think of the things that actually take the most time in the kitchen. Something for me that doesn't take any time is thawing out some ground beef or ground pork and browning it in a skillet. Something like pasta, just throwing some ground beef in that, or Korean beef. We make a lot of that. I wasn't going to pre-ground beef just because that is so easy for someone in my family to do that it doesn't really feel like that would really be saving a whole lot of time. It'd be taking up some freezer space. So though I could see it being slightly helpful to have a Ziploc bag of already cooked ground beef in the freezer, I wanted to focus on the things that would take the most prep work. So sometime in the first week or two, they could easily go out to the freezer, take some packages of ground beef, put them in hot water, brown them, and stretch the meals further with doing that. But then when we're sick of ground beef, sick of those easy to thaw things, they can grab something that was made with chicken that takes a lot more time. Because to take chicken from a whole chicken and stand there and pick it all from the bones, that's a job that really, if you do ahead of time and in bulk, it could actually save you some time and definitely save my family some prep time later on. So because of that, I'm going to make 2 different kinds of soups and a pretty large quantity of them. What I also like about doing soups as a freezer meal, which one of the things I like about them is that you can easily just get them on the table without having to thaw them out first, is you can top them with a lot of fresh things. So in the case of a chicken tortilla soup, they can slice up some fresh avocados, some herbs, maybe put some sour cream and cheese or tortilla chips on it. You have the base there, it's all ready to go. And then you can just add whatever will make it more tasty. One of the ways that I prepared for this pregnancy and in preparing for a baby in postpartum time is by supplying myself with plenty of nutrition. I am in the later years of my fertility. I've had lots of children. This has become increasingly important for me. This is why I'm proud to partner with Needed and tell you about the uncompromising nutrient levels that they provide. Needed is designed to support optimal absorption, and every nutrient is vetted by perinatal experts, always rigorously third-party tested, which is important because 95% of women are deficient in at least one key nutrient, and most vitamins include just bare minimum nutrition, the wrong doses or ingredients, and are filled with fillers and sugars. Nutrition has the power to change health outcomes for mothers and babies. Not just birth outcomes, which is super important, but also your fertility, pregnancy, postpartum, and lifelong health. The average prenatal appointment in the US is about 12 minutes, leaving very little time for optimum nutrition education. Needed offers support not only for pregnancy, but leading up to conception, pre-pregnancy, fertility, and postpartum as well. I plan to continue to take Needed to support my health even after baby is here. Needed's prenatal multi is available in capsules and an easy to take vanilla powder that's perfect for nauseous moms or those with pill fatigue. Right now, Needed is offering 20% off your first order, including one-time purchases or already discounted subscriptions and plans. Head to the link in my description box below or use code FarmhouseOnBoone at checkout. Also today, I wanted to get some doughs going that I know we're going to want. One will be the sourdough bagels, like I mentioned. Those are our go-to. They're just so easy to freeze. And I have been making them with 2/3 whole grain flour and 1/3 all-purpose. I can get away with a much higher ratio of whole grain and they still have all the flavor, all the texture. There are so many different sourdough recipes that really benefit from having all-purpose because they get crispy and fluffy. And then there are certain ones that the whole grain doesn't really seem to mess with the recipe. Some that 100% whole grain actually taste better. Bagels are one of the only ones that has that almost crispy sourdough exterior. It's chewy, but can really stand to have a large quantity of whole grain in it and still turn out really great. I also like with bagels that I don't need to stretch and fold it. So I just mix it up in the bowl and then the next day do the dividing, shaping, boiling, and baking. So it's very, very hands off. Before I tell you about the other dough I got going here on the countertop, I want to tell you what I'm doing here with this bacon. I was thinking through the breakfast sandwiches. And I used to make breakfast sandwiches in bulk for Luke when he was working a traditional job so he could in the morning grab one out and heat it up. But it was a little bit easier because he would have the routine of doing that the night before, take it out of the freezer, put it in the fridge, it'd be thawed by morning, and then he'd put it in a toaster oven. I'm afraid that we're not really going to necessarily think of that. And then when people actually want a breakfast sandwich, they'll just be frozen in the freezer. Not that that can't be done, but I was trying to think more along the lines of freezing the different components of a meal as opposed to the entire thing. So I'm freezing bacon so that someone can freshly fry an egg, which is no big deal. Add a slice of bacon, pop one of the English muffins out of the freezer and into the toaster, and then have a very fresh breakfast sandwich. You know, you can add your greens or cheese or just whatever fresh things you want. And since bacon is a little bit messy to make, making a bunch of it in the oven at one time seemed like a good idea. I'd like to add more to the stash as we get closer to the due date. I'm also straining some black beans that I got going earlier this morning. That way I can at least avoid the canned black beans. And when I'm cooking a large batch, that makes more sense. And then for the other soup, I'm going to do something totally different from that and do a chicken noodle soup. So we kind of have a cozier option and then an option that lends itself to a lot of fresher things for a little bit of variety. I also got all of the bones from the chicken into some water and allowed them to simmer for several hours. I will put them back in the pot, add more water, and get all the rest of the nutrition that I can by simmering them for an additional 24 hours. But I wanted some that I could use right now for these soups. For the other dough that I have going on my counter, I'm doing English muffins. They're also, just like bagels, very hands-off. No trying to develop the gluten, no stretching and folding. Mix it up, let it sit there. I'm making those with 100% whole grain. They do very well with 100% whole grain. The way I adapt recipes is I do 140 grams of flour when doing whole grain per cup that the recipe calls for. So I'm just using the recipes for the bagels and for the English muffins over on farmhouseonboone.com. Of course, I'll link them below. For the bagels, where I'm doing 2/3 whole grain and 1/3 all-purpose, I double it. So I do 6 cups of whole grain hard white wheat. And side note, as I'm saying this, I'm realizing that 6/8 is 3/4. So it's 3/4 whole grain. Correction there. If you want to measure in grams, that's 6 times 140. And then the remaining 2 cups with all purpose. And then I just followed the rest of the recipe as usual, except for, of course, doubling it. For the English muffins, those are also over on farmhouseonboone.com. And I'll do something like kamut or einkorn or rye or spelt. Doesn't have to be hard white, because we're not trying to develop gluten, and I'll do that 140 grams per cup ratio. So the tried and true recipe over on the website that I have been using for a decade now calls for 2.5 cups of flour. So if you are just making 1 times that recipe, which I usually at least 2 times it, that's, I believe, 350 grams. And then if you're 2 timesing it, 700, which is what I did today. And then for the rest of the recipe, I just double everything and make it as usual. Except for that, it's with 100% whole grain. And like I said, English muffins do excellent with 100% whole grain. It's actually a swap that makes them taste as good or better, in my opinion. I do have a recipe for homestyle chicken noodle soup over on the blog. Now, I today just used some pre-made sourdough noodles that I like to get from Thrive Market, but I do have a recipe if you're feeling ambitious as well for actually making homemade noodles. In a situation like this where I'm just trying to prep ahead of time for a baby coming, I am not feeling overly ambitious about making homemade noodles, but I do think that this will be some great nutrition for my family in the coming weeks when I do go to have the baby. Now, I think they could add some broth to this chicken noodle soup, but that's okay because that would be a really good way to heat it back up, to add some broth, put the lid on, kind of let it steam out. I also feel like I could have cooked the noodles a bit less time because they're probably going to cook some when they're bringing it back to temperature, but live and learn. Either way, I think it's going to be good. It was actually delicious because we had some of these soups for dinner as well. I did not make a separate dinner. We just ate from both of them, kind of pick which one you want, and then I froze the rest, which was my goal with a lot of these meals. Also making them for dinner and not doing this like big separate thing. So for breakfast this morning, we are going to have English muffins and I will freeze the rest, and then I will likely do this a few more times so that we have quite a few filling the freezer. If you haven't seen me make English muffins, because I don't think I've made them on here in quite a while, I want to encourage you, whether you're going to freeze some or just make them in your regular rotation, these are such an easy thing to make. The night before, you mix up some flour, starter, and water. Allow them to ferment overnight. And then in the morning, you add some baking soda, salt, and honey. and just drop them on a pan. I like to brown them on both sides and then put them in the oven to finish them off cooking. That way I can make large amounts without having to have several skillets out. I brown them, put them on a baking sheet, pop them in a 350-degree oven, and then just keep going with more and more of them. They're kind of gooey in the middle if you don't let them cook low and slow on the cast iron skillet. So instead, just brown them, throw them in the oven, and keep going. If you watch this channel with any sort of regularity, you have seen me make bagels probably a million times. Not really, because I only have 1,000 videos. But you've seen me make them several times because we just make them so much in our kitchen. And for every time you've seen me make them on YouTube, I've made them several times without ever showing anybody because they're just such a regular staple in our home. And like I said, you can get away with using so much whole grain flour in them. I like that you don't have to stretch and fold anything. You just mix up some dough, walk away, and the next day finish them off by shaping them and boiling them and baking them. As you can see, and I've talked about this a lot, but I like to create a warming station for my bagels. Right now, that is while I'm preheating the oven, I put them all over the top of the stove, which I do, of course, occasionally like to point out that that is dangerous because if somebody were to flip on the burner, then you'd have a fire because there's some parchment paper there and a tea towel. So I don't recommend doing this if you're not closely monitoring. But I'm in my kitchen all morning this morning. I am very much monitoring what is going on. But in the time that it takes to preheat the oven for bagels, if they're in that really warm spot, which on top of the oven while preheating is that very warm spot, they will be ready to boil and bake. And so it's a quick process there in the morning and you can get that out of the way. Even if you have a busy day ahead of you and you need to leave the house at say 9 or 10 a.m. or something like that, you can get those bagels completely done fairly quickly, even if you don't start super early. I used to do a play date at my house and people would come over around 10, and bagels was my favorite thing because if I start them the night before, I could have them ready by the time we did that play date. Whereas a lot of sourdough things, you need a little bit longer for a rise time. Starting them the night before and then having them all the way done in the morning is a really tight, nice time frame. All right, new day, new freezer project. Today I believe I'm 5Xing a recipe for whole grain tortillas. It's a lot of tortillas, but they are just so handy to have. Now, after freezing these, I do kind of think that they're going to have to go in the fridge at least a few hours before, or on the countertop, a few hours before wanting to use them because they'll be stuck together. I thought about putting parchment between them, but it honestly just sounded like way too much extra work for what it was worth. So this is one of those things where I'm just going to tell whoever I put in charge of lunch or dinner that day, hey, go grab some tortillas out of the freezer and a couple packs of ground beef, and in a few hours you can make tacos. That will definitely be easy enough and set them up for success. Again, not that my family can't handle fully making a meal from start to finish, but I do think this will make life a little less stressful for us all because I'm going to need help with the other kids as well and a lot of the house stuff. When you take mom fully out of the equation, there's just a lot of things that a mother does. And so being realistic about that and knowing that your goal is the house not to descend into any kind of chaos with whatever energy you have ahead of time to stop that is the main goal here. Now, I'm also going to make a large amount of meatballs today. I said that I wouldn't thaw out a bunch of ground beef and then just brown it and break it all up, but I think meatballs is a bit of a different preparation that really lends itself to a lot of different meals that would be really nice to have. Plus, throwing them in a freezer bag, they could not stick together. They're all little individual baked already. Meatballs means that you can quickly throw them into whatever dish you're making. So I actually gave them, I was telling my daughter this, I was like, I'm going to make a lot of meatballs. This day, I think I ended up making 9 pounds of meatballs because we froze a bunch, we ate a bunch. I made so many at first, and then I went back out to the freezer, got more out, and made even more. But I was thinking through it because of having such a large quantity of meatballs, all the ways that one could use them. So option one would be to simmer them in barbecue and serve with white rice and herbs from the garden. Option 2, simmer in cream and broth and salt, make like a little cream sauce, and serve with mashed potatoes. And then option 3, simmer in a jarred pasta sauce, like a marinara sauce, and serve over freshly made box pasta. So that's 3 options to utilize meatballs, which to me means that they are a really great freezer item. In preparation for this big meatball making day, I also made a whole bunch of sourdough breadcrumbs, which I do by cutting up or cubing all of the various leftover sourdough bread products that I have laying around at the end of the week, putting them on a baking sheet, toasting them until they're nice and crispy in the oven, and then throwing them in the blender. Those are awesome for things like meatballs and meatloaf, so they're really nice to have on hand. For the whole wheat tortillas, I package them up in about 10 per pack. That seems like a manageable amount that would thaw a little bit faster. So if you take out 2 at once, people can each have 2 tacos or burritos. They're really large size, and I still have a lot of little kids. So a lot of the smaller kids, like the 5-year-old, the 3-year-old, and well, he's 2 now. The 5-year-old, the 3-year-old, and currently 2-year-olds, they will only get about half of one filled, just because if I hand them a whole huge burrito, they're not going to finish it. So packages of 10 to me seemed like a good option. If we have to get out more, that's totally fine as well. Another thing I've been making all throughout this week, but not necessarily showing the entire process, is our baguettes. We love baguettes, and they seem to me like something that would be pretty good in the freezer because you can just cut them in half down the middle, wrap them, throw them in a freezer bag, and then they'd stay really fresh when you pull them out. They would only need to thaw a little bit because they're so skinny, whereas a big bowl would require a lot more thawing time. So they seem like a really great option for freezing. Plus, people in my family just love baguettes. We go through phases where we have a favorite bread. Well, right now it's baguettes, just making them on repeat. I only have 1 baguette pan. So if I make them every day for a week, that's 3 a day for a week. They don't go super far. You need a good 3 baguettes for a family of our size just to sit down and have some sandwiches. So you're not getting super far ahead with 3 baguettes, but slowly over time, just mixing up that dough, being in that daily rhythm is something that I can easily knock out. Another thing I wanted to try in the freezer was twice baked potatoes. Now, technically you're supposed to use russet potatoes for twice baked potatoes, but you all know that I am a big fan of grocery delivery. I utilize it. It really helps me in my kitchen. And they didn't have the organic russet potatoes that I wanted. Now, I should have got on the app and said, if they don't have those, just use regular russet. But instead, I never selected anything. So they just brought organic other potatoes, which is fine because it actually worked out really great. Just like with deviled eggs, I was thinking, man, this process is just like deviled eggs. But the insides of the eggs kind of hold together any whites that you broke. Well, the same is true for twice baked potatoes. That mashed potato insides glues together any subpar peel that you might have had, because russets have a sturdier peel, which is what makes them ideal for making twice baked potatoes. But once you fill it, they're all glued together anyway. So it really worked perfectly. They're a bit labor intensive, but people love twice baked potatoes. And since they're individually wrapped, you can pull them out, put them on a sheet pan or in a baking dish, top them with some cheese, throw them back in the oven, and then maybe top with bacon or scallions or herbs. I might add more to my stash depending on how much time baby girl gives me, but I'm feeling pretty good about our freezer already, and I think that it's really going to add a bit of peace as I'm recovering postpartum.